Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful edition of the Colorado Virtual Operations Support Team Monthly Trainings. This is the September 2017 edition, and we're excited to have you with us today. My name is Kyle Nelson. I'm the Virtual Operations Support Team Training Coordinator for Colorado, and I'm joined this morning by Jennifer Hillman. Jennifer, how are you?
I'm good, Kyle. Good morning, everybody. Jennifer Hillman here, your team manager. Just want to say thank you again for all of those who joined us for our activation a couple weeks ago for the solar eclipse. I think that went pretty well, although it doesn't look like there's a lot of follow-up that people wanted to do on the after action, but we'll get into that here in a minute. We have a wonderful speaker today. I'm very excited. Jeff Donaldson is going to be presenting here in about the next 10 minutes. Kyle and I just have a few little administrative things to finish up this morning before we lead into Kyle, to Jeff. But wanted to let everybody know that we do have some new members. I don't know if everybody saw on Slack this morning, but we do have a couple new members that are going to be joining us probably for the next meeting. I just sent them the information today on Slack and joining the Google groups. But we have Jared Heinrich, who is he's actually a police officer down at the University of Colorado Springs, and he is going to be joining us. I believe he's already joined Slack, and then we have Katie Brown. She's going to be joining us as well. She just hasn't accepted the invite, and I have two more people going through background checks. So we are growing pretty rapidly. I think we're about up to 65 members, which is fantastic. That's going to help us out a lot more with upcoming activations. And speaking of activations, so we had our solar eclipse activation on August the 21st. Had a lot of you guys part of that, and I really appreciate all the effort. I know this was kind of one of the laid back activations. There wasn't a whole lot other than traffic updates and people complaining about traffic. I don't know, do we have any of our new members this was their first activation? Do we have anybody on the line that wants to speak to their experience with this activation, or anybody else that has any comments? Nothing.
All right, and if anyone does have any comments, you can go ahead and drop those in the live chat there on the YouTube link. This is Kyle. I'm monitoring those, so I'll relay those as we go along. But yeah, I think, Jennifer, did we have any comments in the after action tab on our meeting or on our activation workbook?
Yeah, the only thing in there was from me. I just kind of wanted to see how everybody felt about the communication between members and between yourself and me, or Kyle, the management. Just if you felt like there was anything that needed to be passed along. It looked like pretty much everything was standard. You know, people were complaining about being stuck in traffic. We didn't have anything really that needed to be escalated. I was sitting in the Larimer County EOC, so we were monitoring from there. I was helping them directly. Douglas County, I don't think they really had much of an impact until later when traffic started coming back into Colorado. But I just didn't know, did anybody have any thoughts on communication? Did you feel like Slack worked really well? Any ideas for future? Think we're going along the right path? Kyle, I mean, you were part of it. What did you think?
I thought overall it went very well. I thought there was a good teamwork. I really appreciated the coordination that you did, Jennifer, kind of behind the scenes to set us for success for this activation here, and kind of moving from and getting those teams assigned ahead of time, getting those roles assigned, and just being flexible with folks. And I think that's one of the things, and I've heard it from several of my colleagues, you know, who have been on other deployments and things. The whole Semper Gumby approach is a big one for any activation, whether in person or virtual. And overall, I thought the team really pulled together and did a great job. So I just want to give a huge shout out to all of our members here who are either listening live or viewing this recording later on. I thought we all did a great job.
And Kyle, I just want to echo that as well. I think we did a fantastic job, especially because we had so many new members jumping on their very first activation. I really felt like they jumped right in there. They were like old pros. I mean, they got used to it. They got their feet wet, and within the first half hour of their first shift, they were like the rest of us, seasoned veterans. And I think too, I don't know if that helped planning your schedule ahead of time. If you guys like having, a week or two ahead of time, knowing what shift you were being assigned to, what platform you were being assigned to, I will definitely try to do that for every activation. Give you guys as much notice as possible of what you're going to be assigned. And also, I would like to throw out there, if we have an activation coming up and there's a specific role you want to do, like you want to do TweetDeck or you want to do Facebook, just let me know. Because I just try to rotate people through so that they have a little experience with everything that we do. But if you have a specific role that you'd like to play, if you want to do the TweetDeck, if you want to do Facebook, you want to do the real world media on the TV or the web, just let me know, because I am happy to assign you to that role as long as someone else before you hasn't spoken up and asked for that. So just wanted to let you guys know I will definitely try to do that. I know there were some complaints back from the X Games that the roles didn't get assigned until pretty much the night before or the day of, and I know that's got to be frustrating. So I will definitely try to give you guys at least a week or two notice of what you're going to be assigned and what shifts you're assigned to.
Right on. Not seeing any comments here in the live chat. Just, I know for some, as you said at the beginning, not our most exciting activation that we've had. I guess you could say, if I had to phrase it that way, but absolutely, kind of at the. It's one of those things where we have to support our requesting agencies as they've kind of asked us to do. And it may be things that are more hardcore, nitty-gritty kind of stuff. Otherwise, it may be some more general monitoring, requests for assistance, traffic, and things. So definitely understand that, but where our team members are coming from. But I'm sure that as the year goes on and as time goes forward, we will have those activations that do request much more of us.
Exactly. And, I think we were able to cover it just fine with the number of people we had for this particular activation. The fact that it wasn't overly complicated, there were just a few things, just, traffic monitoring and that kind of thing that both of the jurisdictions had asked for. But you're right, Kyle, if we get, an incident activation for a wildfire or a flood or something like that, an emergent situation, then we're going to need a lot more people. So I do appreciate everybody that volunteered to help with the eclipse, especially those of you who stuck with me into the late hours of the evening. Larimer County wanted to extend their activation until 10 p.m. So I did have 3 of you guys volunteer to stick with me for that very late shift, and I really appreciate it. We ended up closing off at 8 o'clock because traffic finally had moved from Wyoming through into Colorado at that point. So there wasn't really a need to continue from 8 to 10, but I appreciate the willingness. I know that gets to be late for us, and some of our members are on the East Coast, so it's even later for you. But I did just want to say a huge shout out to all of our members that took part in that activation. And thanks for sticking with me. And if you have any feedback, you didn't want to put it on the After Action tab, you want to send it to me privately. If you have some thoughts or feedback, please email me, or you can send it to me on Slack. I'm happy to hear your feedback and thoughts on this activation. And I think with that, pretty much sums up our After Action. We will probably just go right into Jeff Donaldson. So Kyle, you want to go ahead and introduce our illustrious speaker here?
Absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. Folks, I'm really excited to introduce our guest presenter today, Jeff Donaldson. It comes to us from Argonne National Labs, where he works currently as an associate, where he conducts classes in social media, emergency preparedness information, and providing exercise support to Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and all the fun acronyms in their government facilities. He has a very strong background in journalism and also emergency public information, and we're really excited to have him with us today to talk a bit about one of his assignments, one of his research projects here, monitoring for public information and outreach with regards to Hurricane Harvey. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Well, thank you, Kyle. And Jennifer, how am I coming across? Can you hear me pretty good?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome, great. Okay, and everybody can see the slides that I'm sharing?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so thanks again for having me. And normally Holly Harden, I know, does this. She wanted to apologize to everyone. She's on her way back. We spent the week in Los Alamos at the National Laboratory there teaching spokesperson training and some EPI type stuff to the folks there at Los Alamos. So that was a lot of fun. She should be back in Tennessee today. But this was sort of timely because this past week, actually 2 weeks ago now, I guess, 2-3 weeks ago, I was asked to conduct some research for FEMA on the social media response to Hurricane Harvey. The first thing, of course, we'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the PASS Fusion Center, which we sort of did under the umbrella of that. PASS Fusion Center stands for Public Affairs Science and Technology. It's an arm of the National Public Affairs Academy. And Holly and Mark Basnight created this center about a year or two ago with the principal idea that, you know, communication is a science. I mean, you know, it's no different than you know, a firefighter who goes out and gets training and has to be recertified. You know, communications is definitely a skill set, and it's one thing to have a social media site or a web page or something that you do and just send information out. But the art of communication, the science of communication, ensuring that your message goes out and is being received, is actually it's really there's a lot of details that go into that. And so what we were hoping to do is create a center that could actually back up a lot of communications and public affairs ideas and concepts with research. So that was really kind of the whole motivation behind that. And they have done actually some real-time communications research. Most recently, Mark Basnight went to Charlotte a couple of years back. It seems like a couple of years. I think maybe it was a year and a half ago, to monitor the riots that were going on down in Charlotte, North Carolina, after an officer-involved shooting. He actually spent a couple days on the ground there interviewing people, finding out, you know, what social media was being used for, what people were saying, what was making them angry, how was communication working or not working. And they did a case study on that. Holly recently, within the last year, did a similar case study on the fires up in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is very near her home. Similar situation where she went up, looked at who had social media sites, what they were using social media for, and as such, she was able to put a case study together that really showed what was done well, which unfortunately was not much in that situation, and a lot of the things that really needed improvement. So again, it's sort of a science looking at how communication platforms and strategies work or don't work to get the message out, with the key being engagement. You know, again, anyone who's done social media, obviously you can post all day long, but how do you know anyone's really reading your messages? Well, it's the comments, it's the sharing, it's the reach, it's all those different variables that play into whether or not people are actually hearing what you have to say. So again, the Hurricane Harvey will go down as sort of like our third case study, although perhaps a little less informal, as most of the products we created were for FEMA directly. I'm sure as soon as FEMA gets done with whatever we gave them, we'll probably pull it back, rework it, and actually put it out as another source of research for the PASS Fusion Center. So we do a lot of hands-on immersive training in this stuff. We bring people in, we teach them what we know, and we get their feedback, see what their individual needs are, and we try to work to match those two things together. So along the way, we've developed a lot of courses that we make available to people. We have courses in media relations, public affairs, risk and crisis communications, digital technology, things like that. So we can cater a program to anything anyone needs. And so we take a lot of feedback. We generate a curriculum around what someone's hoping to learn or get more information on, and then we come out to wherever you are. And we can also do it over the computer. We can do it, you know, however you guys, whatever meets your needs. So just to be aware of that, if you ever need anything from us, we are here as a resource. That's our primary goal, to provide that sort of help and resource to you guys to do what you need to do. So moving forward on this project, our PASS Fusion Center was asked to support FEMA around August 25th. Actually, the call came on Friday afternoon, August 25th. My girlfriend was in surgery. I was standing in the waiting room, and I got a call from Brett Hansard, our supervisor. He said, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm going to be taking care of a person just coming out of surgery." He said, "Well, FEMA would like you to do some media monitoring." And at first I thought, well, okay, no big deal. But I became a one-man show, and for the next 5 to 6 days, I spent about 12 or 13 hours a day on the computer monitoring social media. FEMA, what they told us was they were pretty much looking for protective action information. That they weren't looking at anything and everything, but they wanted to know which counties in the affected regions where the hurricane was heading, which ones were using social media as a resource to communicate with the public, things like evacuation orders, shelters in place, anything that would have to do with preparing for the hurricane. So I began monitoring social media around the 25th. And of course, I really had to track back to around August 23rd, because that was when the tropical depression and the storm was working its way up through the Gulf. People started paying attention to it. A lot of the initial posts started coming out around the 23rd. So basically, we were asked to monitor emergency management, public safety agencies, anything that would have been sort of the jurisdictional representation of that county. So in some cases, it was an Office of Emergency Management. In some cases, it was the county. Some of the counties are much smaller, so their sheriff's office or their law enforcement agency represented their official voice, I guess, of that particular jurisdiction. We also looked up into Louisiana, where, of course, they don't have counties, they have parishes. We picked also some cities. We were hoping to get maybe 10 or 12 cities, but there was so much redundancy in the coverage. For example, Houston is located in Harris County, and Harris County had a pretty robust social media campaign, whereas Houston, they had some specific social media, but nothing wide-ranging that we were looking at. So we did look at Houston as an example. Corpus Christi County and Corpus Christi City we looked at. Galveston City, Galveston County we looked at, but we ended up just sticking to the 3 cities also as part of our research. Again, we looked at primarily Twitter and Facebook. The question came up, should we be looking at Instagram and Snapchat, some of these others? But again, I was a one-man show, and so we had to sort of set some parameters that were operable for me. And again, we also sort of focused in on just the protective action stuff. Although, to be honest, I mean, as you know, with Facebook, you know, the posts can be pretty long, and when people start commenting, they get even longer. So by the time it was done, I was monitoring probably thousands and thousands of posts and comments over the course of a day. So there was a lot of reading involved. But one of the other research parameters we set up was, you know, we couldn't monitor 3,000 counties. So we sort of set a goal of coastal counties. We said, what would be the counties that would be almost definitely impacted by this hurricane coming in? And obviously the coastal counties, because you're dealing with, you know, first landfall, flooding, storm surge, that sort of stuff. And so we checked back about two counties deep into Texas. So we basically drew a line on the southwestern coast of Texas, 2 counties deep, and we just made a list of all the counties, 2 counties in, all the way up from the Mexico border to the Louisiana border. And then, of course, we moved over and did the same with the parishes, going all the way over to New Orleans. So that was our parameter. Looking only at Facebook and Twitter. In some cases, it was fairly easy. We actually found that there were about, I think it was 18 counties that weren't using social media at all. Not their Office of Emergency Management, not their sheriff's office, nobody. So surprising, when you pick 42 counties, virtually almost half had no social media platform whatsoever. So that in and of itself was kind of an interesting finding. Then, of course, we broke it down. Once the ones we were looking at, there were about 24 counties that used Facebook exclusively. There was 1 county that used Twitter exclusively, and I'm really bad at math, so my numbers probably don't add up, but there was about 10 or 11 that were using Facebook and Twitter together. They had two different. They were using both platforms. So again, a primary interest of FEMA was regarding evacuations and protective actions pertaining to the hurricane. We did find out, and again, we weren't out to document the official source. We weren't looking for whether or not they issued a mandatory evacuation or a voluntary evacuation on their website or through a press release or anything else. This, again, was, did they communicate a protective action like an evacuation notice on social media? And so while there were more than 24 counties that actually issued the notices, again, there was a fraction of that actually did issue evacuation notices via social media. So that was what FEMA was focused on, is how are they using social media channels to get the word out to people. Any questions so far about anything I've brought up?
Hey, Jeff, it's Kyle. Just we have a question from one of our members. Yeah, okay. Who's kind of wondering with kind of how you explained like the setup with the monitoring and all, being a one-man show. Did you ever thought of maybe expanding the team or get more folks involved, or did you instead scale the scope of your monitoring based on you just being a one-person show?
Yes and yes. I mean, we would have really liked, we probably should have, we would have been, I think, a little more effective had we had more people involved. But the way the staffing on this went, we weren't really sure what FEMA was asking for in the beginning. we sort of set our own parameters as we went. And so, as you can imagine, the storm, the 23rd, 24th is still out there. It's coming towards the coast. What is it going to impact? What are they looking for? Our project leader was actually in Texas with FEMA at the time. So we were on 3 phone calls a day, getting feedback from him as what he wanted. And the first order was, well, they just want some lessons learned. They just want a list of what are we seeing on social media. But that project started as like throwing darts at a dartboard. Okay, I look over here at Calhoun County and what are they saying? I look at Harris County and what are they saying? But, as anything to do with research, you've got to kind of really start setting some parameters and narrow it down. And by the time we got into Friday and Saturday, the 25th and 26th, that was when things started really, really happening. And unfortunately, at that point, we just didn't have the staffing. We had some GIS folks who were involved, who were going to do some maps for us that sort of tracked social media usage and kind of give a visual representation of what we were finding, but we just didn't really have the resources at that point. So, the answer to your question is, yeah, we could have easily had 5 or 10 people at a minimum watching all this stuff, and it would have made it probably easier. It probably would have made it a little more productive. But on the other hand, I found that it wasn't overly difficult to weed through all that and find the posts on evacuation orders. So again, we weren't looking at every single specific comment or every single reference. We were looking at the first reference. So I was able to go through each county that we put on our map, and I was able to say yes or no. Did they issue via social media a voluntary or a mandatory evacuation notice? Again, in some cases, the county didn't do an evacuation notice for the entire county. It was for regions. It was, for example, an area around a reservoir or a dam was starting to fill up. They would order a mandatory evacuation in a particular area. So if it was a small area of the county, we still said the county was ordering evacuation. So again, there were some parameters set up based on the resources we had. And as you mentioned, we kind of narrowed our scope down, A, based on what FEMA was telling our guy that they wanted, and B, just on what we had available. So again, looking specifically at what they wanted, I think we did a pretty good job with that. The interesting thing about it, though, and I'll get more into this now, is it changed a lot. You can imagine on the 25th, when I started Friday, the hurricane was coming in. And to be honest, I was really surprised. I think there were probably less than 7 or 8 counties out of 40 plus that had ordered any type of evacuations at all, mandatory or voluntary. And so it was sort of surprising. And I think it's made fairly national news now that the city of Houston actually came out and said, we're not evacuating. We don't need to evacuate. I think the mayor got on TV on national news and said, well, we've had floods before. We get 3 or 4 feet of water and then it recedes and it's no big deal. We're not going to evacuate. And unfortunately with this storm, what happened was, as you know by now, it hit on the 25th and 26th, and then it went back out to sea. Went back out into the Gulf, and it picked up some speed, and it came back in, and it hit again a little bit further north. But it brought tremendous rainfall and tremendous flooding like they hadn't seen in Texas, I think perhaps ever. And so at that point, what you started seeing around the 27th and 28th was mandatory and voluntary evacuation notices popping up everywhere. And I guess you should sort of say to yourself, better late than never. But in some cases, they were really trying to get people out of some of these areas that were becoming inundated with floodwater. So I think our number of counties started out maybe a dozen or so that had issued notices prior to the 20th or on the 25th. And that increased, I'd say probably a good 50, 60% by the time the storm came back around on the 27th, 28th. So again, we monitored, of all the 42 counties and parishes and 3 cities we looked at, there were 3 counties that were tremendously active on social media, and those were Calhoun, Harris, and Nueces County. And I think it's Harris County Houston is actually located in. But they were very aggressive. They had a great social media campaign. Again, Houston was in one of those counties, which was extremely hard hit. These agencies, they put out hundreds of storm-related social media messages. And they did a really good job of monitoring what people were saying. I did read through some of the comments, a lot of folks weighing in on various things. And I noticed there was a lot of media monitoring going on by those agencies as they were actually responding to comments that people were making, questions that people had. So it was, yeah. So anyway, looking at what we were finding, this is kind of the important part, I guess. First of all, I wanted to bring up the city of Corpus Christi and the county of Corpus Christi, and the same with the city of Galveston and the county of Galveston. The cities of Corpus Christi and Galveston maintained very, very robust social media responses. They had a lot of different things covered, from health and safety, medical issues, avoiding disease, how to prepare an evacuation hurricane kit, a lot of preparatory stuff, a lot of information during the event, a lot of responses. The county, on the other hand, was a little more formal. They were issuing, they would issue weather updates, NOAA and National Weather Service updates. They did have some responses to questions and queries, but it was interesting. The cities were actually more actively engaged. And what we found kind of fascinating of those two, in particular, Corpus Christi and Galveston, it didn't seem a whole lot of coordination. Typically when you think of joint information centers and joint information systems, where you have emergency management professionals together, you liaison between these groups, and I guess hopefully you know who your audience is, who's reading what, and you cater your messages to whoever your audience is. But there didn't appear to be a whole lot of coordination between the cities and the counties as far as what they were putting out. There was some duplicate information, in some cases some things left out altogether. We found that fascinating that the counties in those particular areas had a less robust response. Other counties and municipalities, they executed social media campaigns with some varying degrees of success. What we did see was pretty consistent was live streaming. Almost everybody was using Facebook Live. The ones that use Facebook were using Facebook Live to broadcast their press conferences, media updates, things like that. In some cases, emergency management officials out filming, things like flooded streets, cars floating down the road, people trying to get out of their houses, things like that. So live streaming used really almost by all of the ones using Facebook. Very interesting to see such consistent usage of Facebook Live for that. And again, very, very effective. And as always, the rule, you're probably aware of this in social media, the best posts are the one that have graphic elements. So we saw a lot that were using photos, maps, charts, things like that. That, of course, typically garnered a lot of comments from people.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
This is Jennifer. Just a quick question, because I'm seeing that as well in our monitoring with that Facebook Live streaming is becoming a lot more prolific. Were there any problems? Did you run into any problems like when the storm hit? Because obviously people's networks probably weren't working as well. Did they have any issues with the live streaming?
They did some. I mean, we didn't really see a lot of live streaming while the hurricane was actually actively in the region. It was mostly like the press conferences leading up to or immediately after. I think when the storm came back around the 27th or 28th, we were seeing some live broadcasts from people rescuing and that sort of stuff. But at that point, the storm had already sort of passed. So I think I can't say that I saw anywhere where it looked like a network issue or that a technology issue had been impacted by the storm itself. I probably shouldn't speculate, but I'd speculate that there were probably a number of people who just couldn't get to their phones or their computers during this because they were either being flooded out of their houses or things like that. So when we teach emergency public information, that's one thing we actually do look at. So that's good you actually brought that up, because what happens if you do get a storm in an area, it knocks all the power out. No one can get on their computers. I mean, I'm assuming you can get on your phones because of the satellites and things like that. But there are some degradation in your ability to use certain types of the social media during a storm. We still saw some robust activity as far as the county and the city sending this stuff out. So not really a whole lot of degradation from that. But something else we also saw was a lot of amplification of partnering agencies. In other words, people sharing other agencies' posts. This was mostly on Twitter, but we had a lot of counties that would post other counties' stuff. They would post from the power company, for example, that your electricity is out in these specific areas. One of the big rumors that seemed to be coming out, someone had it in their mind that the power company was actually going to shut the power off before the storm got there. And there were a lot of postings by the local utility companies that, no, we're not shutting the power off in advance, but you may lose your power during. And of course, there were a lot of outages reported after the fact. So just a lot of different reposts of things. In Texas, a lot of highway department reposts of where interstate highways were being flooded or inaccessible, or where evacuation areas, you couldn't get into the area itself. They were parking buses at overpasses and having people come up the on-ramps and getting on the buses up there. So a lot of that stuff was being shared from the Texas Department of Transportation, I think it's called. And so other agencies also getting their information out. One of the most commonly used tools that we saw were interactive maps. almost every municipality, every county seemed to use these maps where a resident could go in, type in their address, and it would tell them if they were in a floodplain or in an evacuation zone. And these posts seemed to garner the most feedback, but the feedback wasn't always good. What was happening was a lot of negative criticism about the fact that it wasn't clear. The boundaries of the maps weren't easy to see. In some cases, they didn't work. Someone was on a line. I'm in between this place and this place, so what do I do? Or just it seemed a lot of confusion. And some of the counties did a really good job of answering those comments and questions. Some of them ignored them completely. So one of our recommendations, and again, we weren't necessarily asked for more.
Were they all using the same platform for those interactive maps, or were they different?
That's something we're not sure of, and it's something we'll have to go back and take a look at. Yeah, we're not sure how they were hosting them. Some of it could have just been the technology itself. The map itself might not have been right. But as part of our lessons learned list that FEMA initially asked us for, we put in some recommendations that these municipalities that are going to use these maps, go back and just take a look at that. Go back and take a look at your maps periodically. Are they up to date? Are they functional? A lot of this also comes down to just the ability of your audience to deal with computer-based problem-solving skills, which is, I guess, is a PC way of saying they just don't know how to use them. But so you also have to sort of look at that variable. Are we dealing with folks that just don't know how to use this technology and they're getting lost along the way? And that can really be a handicap to you as you're using these maps. So again, so much of what we do at PAST Fusion Center is trying to help people just come up with strategies for how to best communicate what you're trying to tell people. And I think this type of research says, you've got individuals that just aren't getting the message the way that you hope they get the message. And again, a lot of the comments, there were hundreds of comments on these maps, so it wasn't just a couple people. It was an area that was clearly of concern to these folks. Something else we found that I found very, very interesting. The Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard, asked residents not to use social media. They came right out and said, don't monitor social media because we're not looking at it, and your rescue time and response times are going to be seriously hindered if you use social media. Well, this was like revolutionary because in a time when we're seeing more and more agencies use social media to help with logistics and rescues and information and all this kind of stuff as far as operational procedures are concerned, to see a major organization go, don't do it, was really a shock. And there were literally thousands of comments from people going, what do you mean? I'm stuck on the top of my roof. I need to be rescued. What do you mean I can't use social media? Because what they were asking them to do is call the 911 centers, and the 911 centers were just overloaded. So you couldn't get through. And so we saw, and I could literally say hundreds of examples of people rescuing other people after they saw posts on social media. Either they reached out to someone who had a boat, who was near somebody, to go get them off the roof, get them out of their houses. Police agencies were monitoring social media, so they would see requests for rescue. So especially after the 27th, the 28th, when the floods had come in, we were seeing a lot of social media-based rescues. So ironically, that one of the leading rescue agencies, in the world, was basically telling people don't use social media. So our recommendation from that was, well, obviously you're going to do what you want to do, but really to sort of use this as a case study to say, you probably don't want to cut off one of the most essential ways of communicating, this type of protective action information, whether that means beefing up your staff and having more social media monitors, or perhaps just increasing the awareness that this is an outstanding tool to use to sort of alleviate some of that backlog in the call centers, giving people an option to help get out of a dangerous situation. Whatever it is you use it for, you can't ignore it. And that was kind of one of the big things. We were sort of really surprised to see that, and a lot of agencies that we were monitoring retweeted the Coast Guard's request that people not use social media. So it was really it surprised a lot of people, I think. And lastly, for this slide, we saw that almost every agency used social media to repost like National Weather Service or NOAA maps on the storms track. These were typically used in conjunction with local updates or evacuation notices, and a lot of the residents generated posts and comments from these tweets and these Facebook posts. They were talking about, the projection would be the storm's going to go here, or we're expecting this much rainfall, or this reservoir is going to reach a certain limit. And so a lot of folks weighing in saying, well, what does that mean for me? And if that river is going to overflow, do we need to leave? Why didn't you order an evacuation order for us if you knew that reservoir was going to reach that limit? You know, just a lot of back and forth between the counties and the residents about these particular maps. Any questions about any?
Yeah, Jeff, two questions from our members.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can have a conversation about this slide for, I mean, you can make a college class out of this slide. Just two questions that came up here. With first one with regard to live streaming, and how you define, you know, the degree of success with these agencies as you were monitoring. And from the live streaming perspective, did you see any techniques that were used to overcome some of the challenges that live streaming presents, such as you know, noise, interference, low bandwidth? Did you see any techniques that were used that drove a higher success rate for those agencies?
Those are really good questions, and I would love to sit here and say yes. And here's what it is. Unfortunately, no. And what we found is, because of this being an ongoing, fairly severe crisis, most of the live streams were press conferences, press briefings, and you know, the bandwidth was fine. In most cases, you could see the people, you could hear the people. They were very organized. It was, you know, we're going to do this at 9 o'clock. Here's the county office of emergency management manager. Here's the sheriff. Here's the fire chief. They gave their messages. They answered a few questions, and that was pretty much it. So, you know, in a few places, you saw the feed kind of come in, go out a little bit, and that may have had a lot to do with either what the storm was doing in that particular area, or, I mean, really, when you're talking live streaming, it could have even been on my end for all that matters. But so nothing there really that stood out as something they did. A lot of the live streaming was from a room, from a conference room or a operations center, that sort of stuff. But as far as the part of how did we gauge its effectiveness, well, one of the things you can do with Facebook Live is, you know, what makes it so great is people can comment. And a lot of these videos did garner a lot of comments, a lot of feedback. A lot in the hundreds. I wouldn't say we saw thousands and thousands of people weighing in on these live broadcasts, but interesting to see dozens of comments, up to 100 comments in some cases, from people. Again, a lot of them wanting to know, can I take my animal to a shelter? You know, you said this shelter was open, but now it's closed. And why is this particular part of the county evacuating, but you didn't ask for this part to evacuate? And one of the other things FEMA had actually mentioned, that they didn't really formally set a criteria, but what about supplies? What about fuel? Are stores running out of supplies? Are we seeing information that this store has more stuff than another, or is there gas available at this place? I actually, of all the posts I saw, and there were literally thousands, I only saw one post on Twitter, counting, and I wish I could remember the name of it, but they mentioned that this particular hardware store still had some lumber and sandbags and things like that. So, you know, a lot of that stuff was being commented during these live streams. So it was definitely reaching an audience. There were people watching them. But again, to quantify exactly how successful or unsuccessful they were, really, I think that's something we'll have to go back. And we actually are hoping to go back and maybe even talk to some of these counties after they've kind of picked up their pieces and gotten through this part of it, and just find out what they thought of how it worked. And maybe if they have some examples internally that they could demonstrate for us as to how this stuff was responded to on their part. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. And as you said, you know, some things you observed live and in the moment, but definitely would be interesting to go back and to dig a little bit deeper, as you said, to gain some of those best practices from these agencies. So the second question, with regard to the graphics and photos bullet point here on the slide, did you see kind of as the event, as Harvey evolved, did you see a shift or a change in the types of graphics or photos that were being shared from, say, the start to the middle and on through towards the end stages of the high impact in the Texas area?
Not really. Most of the National Weather Service and NOAA graphics that were being shared were actually being generated from somewhere, I'm assuming, that was not in Texas, because most of them had, you know, good color. They were fairly easy to read and understand. I will say there were it's funny that now that you say that, I remember thinking back around the 26th, 27th, that some of the graphics we were seeing, evacuation zone maps, things like that, were kind of almost elementary. They were just, you know, there were no colors to them. They were sort of, there's a couple of counties that just, it looked like they had put it together on the spot. And so now that you say that, I think, yeah, you know, there was a couple that looked a little out of sorts, and I kind of went, I wonder why that one looked so bad compared to the other one, and it didn't really register with me until you just said that, and maybe it was because the storm was going on. They didn't have the resources at the time. But again, I wouldn't throw that out there as a quantitative example. I didn't see enough of that. Most of what I saw from the weather services were fairly colorful, effective graphics, video interactions, things like that. What obviously did happen after the storm started hitting were the photographs started getting better. Sheriff's offices were going out to check on people. People were sending pictures out from their homes, their neighborhoods, videos of water running down their street. One county actually showed these cowboys on horses trying to get this herd of cattle out of the floodplain and across the bank in the middle of the flood. I mean, there was probably 4 or 5 feet of water, and they're trying to move these cows across this field. And so just some really dramatic video. I think there was one that made national news out of the Houston area of a firefighter who had a kid in his arm, and he's wading through waist-deep flood water to pull him out of a house and that sort of stuff. So definitely the photos started getting really almost chilling as the storm started hitting on the 27th and 28th. And again, this really was a tale of two storms. I mean, the first storm, obviously, the hurricane came in, did a lot of damage around Corpus Christi, Galveston, Houston, that sort of stuff. But then it went back out. And when it came back in, I think that's when it got the attention of pretty much everybody at that point, because the floodwaters were just so intense. And I don't think a county was spared down there. I think, like I said, based on the number of evacuation orders we started seeing come into play, shelters in place. We actually had a couple of counties where the sheriff got on and said, because people were responding saying, well, where do we evacuate to? And he just came flat out and said, it's too late for you. You should have evacuated already. Yeah, you just need to shelter where you are. And if the water, gets into your house or you're in distress, then you give us a call, So it was really interesting to see sort of that level of response. But they, So anyway, that's the photos got better and better as the event went on. The graphics were fairly consistent, but again, I think most of those are being generated from other sources. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate that. Jennifer, you have something?
Yeah. Sorry, Jeff. This is Jennifer. I did have one question, and it sounds like you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I was just curious, were you able to see any patterns about as far as engagement or interactivity for the agencies that started using social media warnings like ahead of the storm? They've been predicting this for a week or two out. The agencies that maybe started posting things a week out, like this could hit us, be aware, and seeing the number of people following and engaged and interactive, as opposed to those that just started like the day of the hurricane.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Jennifer. And actually, we did one of the. I set up a spreadsheet, and each of there was a specific data point FEMA was looking for, and actually the very first one was what was their very first storm post, and so almost every single one of them, and there might have been one or two exceptions, began posting around the 23rd, and I think around the 23rd of August was about the time it had entered the Gulf. It was moving its way up. It was, the Weather Service was starting to talk about this could become a hurricane, that sort of stuff. So you started seeing almost every county that had a Facebook page started showing a map of where the storm was at, an update as to what the Weather Service was saying, and a warning that, hey, we need to pay attention to this. In some cases, you're in a hurricane watch or you're in a storm watch or whatever. So that was fairly consistent around the 23rd or so. Some of the counties did a really good job. I was very impressed at some of the counties like Nueces County, Harris, Calhoun, the ones that clearly are social media savvy. They began just massive posting every day, things like how to prepare your hurricane kit, stock up on your water. Some of the places were offering sandbags and things like that, where to get them, shelters. Even before evacuation orders were issued, there were some places setting up shelters for animals and for people, and so there was a lot of like public service notices, like never run your generator indoors because the carbon monoxide will kill you. Kind of the gee whiz stuff that you don't normally think about, but things like that they were putting in there. Things like make sure you know where all your flood insurance documents are, so that if your home gets affected and FEMA shows up, you've got what you need. So really, some of the counties did an outstanding job of posting a lot before the storm ever became a hurricane, bracing people for the potential of what could have happened. But and so unfortunately, there were a lot of counties that didn't go to that extreme. For the first couple, 2-3 days, they simply posted storm updates. Just keep a lookout for this thing. It might bring some heavy. That was the big thing. It might bring some heavy rain. And by the 27th or 28th, I'm probably going, wow. Yeah, it did. But so yeah, so a lot of at least acknowledgement of the storm. But some did a better job than others as far as really prepping people, getting them the mindset that there was a major event coming.
Thank you.
There's it. Good. Okay. Any other questions about this slide before I move to the next?
No, no other questions here.
Okay, great. Yeah, and again, these were some of the key things we discovered, in the course of monitoring thousands of posts from 40 plus agencies over the course of about 5 or 6 days. I initially prepared my first report I issued on the 25th, I think, or 26th, which, as you can imagine, was much more scaled down than what I came up with by the time we hit the 28th and 29th. I collected data through about the 30th or the 1st of September, and then at that point, we had to sort of call it quits because FEMA wanted maps, updated maps of what we had done so far. So our first maps went out around the 26th or so, and it had a sort of a brief look at which counties were using social media platforms, which ones weren't, which ones were posting evacuation orders, and which ones weren't. But as obviously as we got deeper into the storm, more counties started popping up. The maps started getting bigger, and we had to sort of really sort of clamp down on how much information we truly wanted to give FEMA. But in the end, I ended up compiling about a 195-page report of all the counties, where I actually took screen captures of every evacuation notice on Twitter and Facebook, any shelter in place, some other key things like storm updates, anything that seemed of relevance. Like, I guess there were looters at one point, and one sheriff basically said, if you're caught looting, we're going to shoot you on sight, that sort of stuff. So little things that seemed to really kind of catch my attention that I thought might be of interest in the context of monitoring this stuff. I would screen capture those as well. So in the end, we provided FEMA with an almost 200-page look at each county that did use social media and how all that social media played out. So that was kind of how that went. But so this was a little bit more of our findings. Fake news. This was really interesting, and of course, we're in a generation right now, or in a period of fake news and all that kind of stuff. But what we noticed was a lot of rumor control being done. And in the past, you might have seen a post that said so-and-so saying, this happened and it's not true. But we saw a number of counties actually taking a screenshot of the fake news report, putting a big banner of false across it and reposting it, and basically saying that this is something that's being circulated and it's not right. And so this was the first time we've seen it at that level. I mean, normally, again, rumors have always been, I've corrected a few. I had an event here out in Nevada where we had a gas leak, and people were reporting it was here but not there, and that sort of stuff. And we just simply went out and said, no, this gas leak is here. It's not there. It's easy to fix, right? That's the great thing about the timeliness of social media. But this was interesting to see him actually take the fake news report and lay it out there. And again, fake news, when I say that, not the kind of political stuff we're seeing right now as far as whether it's fake or real or whatever, but just whatever the rumor was, whatever the false report was, they would post it up there and let everybody know it wasn't right. And so that brings me something that Holly would probably want me to bring up, and that's FEMA. And I think they started this for Hurricane Sandy, but FEMA actually, during these types of events, they established a fake media page. They set up a page to correct bogus reports. That's all it does. It's a dark site. They bring it active during a storm. And so they'll collect things that are sent to them. They'll collect false reports, put it on there, and then next to that on the website, they'll say, well, here's the actual news. Here's the real report. Here's what it is. So a real concentrated effort to try to keep people informed. So what was going on this time, it was really interesting to see some of the counties very actively engaged in correcting mistakes on social media. And again, establishing their agency as the official source, basically saying, if you're not getting it from us, it's probably not right. And we saw this happen. The first time it ever really got noticed was during the Boston Marathon bombing. A lot of rumors and information was coming out, and Boston PD came right out and told people, we are the official agency for news about this event. If you get it anywhere else, it's not right. It's got to be from us. And so what we've seen since the bombing is this real tendency for government agencies, in particular county emergency management offices, to basically say, this is us. We're the folks with the accurate, verified information. And what I did notice was quite a few comments from residents who were thankful, or who sort of bounced back ideas that, yeah, we saw that report, or hey, there was another report that somebody said this, and then the county would respond, well, yeah, that's not true either. So it got people talking about the rumors, and it gave these agencies a conduit to correct that misinformation. We were asked by FEMA to find one county that we could sort of do a snapshot of to put a microscope on it, look at it more closely. As you guys have pointed out, when you're doing this much data with one person, and then you sort of your scope of work gets narrowed down to we're looking for evacuation orders. We didn't want it to just be that. We didn't want just a map of who used it and who didn't to issue an order. We wanted to at least look at one county and say, this is what they did well, this is what they didn't do well, and use that as sort of a base point for maybe building this report at a future date. So at FEMA's request, we looked at Fort Bend County, Texas. Fort Bend County has Facebook and Twitter. They used both very effectively. They were one of only 2 counties out of all the ones I looked at that actually they used Facebook and Twitter independently. In other words, everyone knows Facebook has a different age demographic and a different audience than Twitter. Fort Bend and Brazoria County, Texas were really, from what I could tell, the only 2 counties who actually sat down and gave some serious thought to what was going on Facebook versus what was going on Twitter. And of course, your next question might be, which is which? I mean, what do you use each platform for? And what we were seeing, at least for this storm, Facebook was being used more for graphic elements, pictures, maps, videos, more lengthy updates, lists of evacuation shelters, a list of road closures, things like that, where you needed more space and more characters. What you were seeing on Twitter with these 2 counties in particular, Fort Bend and Brazoria, was Twitter being used for these quick hits, like, hey, by the way, the so-and-so Federal Credit Union is going to be open on Saturday to help you with storm response. This gas station still has gas. This hardware store still has hardware. Schools are closed. That sort of stuff. Just the quicker hit stuff that seemed to gear to a younger crowd. And so anyway, Fort Bend and Brazoria seemed to really give some thought to what they were using these platforms for. And Fort Bend was the one we decided to really click into and kind of get close and personal with. So what we found with Fort Bend is they were using social media long before the storm ever got there. They had posted literally hundreds of messages on potential road closures, shelters, evacuation areas, just a lot of what seemed important information to the residents. In turn, the residents were providing great feedback, asking questions about where they could go. Did they think this was going to close, or the school's going to be closed all week? County offices are closed. Juror summons, being a juror in a jury, you don't have to go, you don't have to report, things like that, all being really put out timely, hundreds and hundreds of posts every day from these two platforms. And again, how do we know? What's the best way to gauge whether our social media message is getting out to our audience? Well, are they writing back to you? What's the 2-way engagement factor? Are we seeing comments? Are people sharing things? Are they reposting? That sort of stuff. And we saw a lot of that going on. Also saw a lot of live briefings. As you may or may not know, if you're from Texas, you get very familiar with the judge. The judge in a county is almost more important than a mayor or a council member. The judge basically calls the shots. And what we saw from Fort Bend County was the judge, and I don't know his name by now because it seemed like he was on Facebook Live every hour almost, but he did a really good job of getting up on Facebook Live, giving updates to his folks, giving them a kind of an update where we are right now, and echoing evacuation orders, areas that were going to be impacted by the storm, where you could go, what you could do with your pets, that sort of stuff. It was very impressive to see how many briefings they actually did. And again, the messages seemed to be very, very appropriately tailored to their audience. They had an online presence throughout the storm and the flooding. They provided a lot of updates on the water levels of the Brazos River and the Barker Reservoir. They posted health and human service notices about the dangers of flood water, insects, diseases, that sort of stuff. Transportation posts, sheriff's office posts about road closures. They shared weather service posts and water level predictions. I looked at about 250 comments from the residents. Primary communication was the evacuation. Most of these folks want to know if they were in the zone, did they need to leave, when could they come back, that sort of stuff. Was their house going to be impacted by it? And a lot of the comments were criticism about their maps not being useful, or they weren't clear which area they were supposed to be in or where they were supposed to go to, or confusion over where a shelter was at. Some of that to be expected during a storm of this size when you're evacuating thousands of residents, but interesting to see really a lot of negative comments. Most of the comments I guess the point of this piece of information is we didn't get a lot of people taking time to compliment them during the storm on how great it was going. The comments we did see were typically people who were confused, didn't think the maps were effective, or just couldn't understand them. And again, how much of that was the audience, how much of that was the technology, we won't know unless we take an even deeper snapshot. But what I did notice is towards the end of the storm, 27th, 28th, some residents were getting just a little snipey about, why do we have to leave and they don't have to leave and this kind of stuff. And the judge actually took it upon himself to go on Facebook Live on a couple of occasions, and he, in a very heartfelt way, explained to the residents what their reasoning was. We evacuated this area because we thought this, we didn't do this area because we thought that. And again, was it effective? The comments stopped. We didn't see a lot of people going, "Thanks, Judge, you're the greatest." But we did see a lot of the negativity kind of trickle down after these Facebook Live feeds were completed. So again, you can see they were monitoring the social media. They were really gauging what the people were saying, and they were responding to it with the resources they had. So again, Fort Bend did a really, really good job. It was a good case study of the right way to do social media. And of course, then getting down to what FEMA really wanted, our key discovery here was they issued a voluntary evacuation order for the first time on August 26th. So again, clearly from the approaching second storm, that was at 12:29 on Facebook, and then on Twitter they had it out at 12:30, so 1 minute later, and then by 3:16 that day, or 3 hours later, they had indicated on Facebook that some of those evacuations were becoming mandatory. So again, we provided FEMA with sort of a bottom line on what they were looking at, who was using social media to communicate their protective action requests. So any question about Fort Bend County and what we saw out of that region?
No, not seen any questions in the live.
Okay, all righty. So then what we were asked to do at the end was, in addition to my 186, 87 page report, numerous spreadsheets and information we provided, maps we provided, we actually provided FEMA with some very, very good material, and their marks were very high for the data that we were providing. And I did want to throw an interesting note in here. We actually found the downside of trying to monitor social media. We had to remind both FEMA and some of the folks on our team that social media is not an exact science, and it cannot be an exact science. And I'll give you an example why. If I looked at a post on the 26th and it had been posted on the 26th, the only thing it would tell me is how many hours ago it was posted. So I would have to look at my microwave clock and say, okay, it's 8:58, so 3 hours ago was 5:58, but it's 2 hours later in Texas, so that was 7:58, and that's the time I noted. Well, as you know, if you go to Facebook on the next day, the 27th, it tells you specifically the time that it actually got posted the day before. So if I did the research on the 26th, for example, and I took the screen capture and I documented it, but then you maybe doing some QC work, or you needed to get a better graphic or whatever, you went back and looked at it, suddenly you're looking at the time going, well, you got it wrong. And so there was a lot of phone calls, a lot of questions being asked. Well, did they declare the evacuation order at 12:23, or was that 2:41 or what? I mean, just a lot of questions about the data, and I felt like, and I was back in school, because a lot of times I had to explain to them the way the algorithms of social media work, the way the whole thing works, is that information will change those exact times. And the other thing with Facebook is you can actually go back in time. Let's say one agency issued an evacuation order on Saturday, but you didn't do yours till Tuesday. You can actually go on Facebook and insert your evacuation order in the timeline for Saturday. And we actually saw that happening a couple of times. And what was the motivation for that? I'm not sure. Maybe a CYA type of situation. But so we did see some of the data change a little bit. It got a little fluid at times, and we were getting a little tripped up. And at one point I finally had to say, look, this particular date at this particular time, and I think it was the 28th of August at noon, that needs to be our cutoff. So anything prior to that, we document. Anything after that, we need to be very liberal in our screen captures and exactly whether we're trying to document these times or not, because it's gonna come back to bite us if we're constantly having to update our data based on these changing variables of the tool. So I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but it was an interesting thing. Again, we're not, as researchers with communications in particular, sometimes the mechanisms are a little hindering, and you have to be aware of these types of things and communicate those things to everybody else on your team and to your customer, the people you're generating the products for, so they understand that there has to be some give and take on the accuracy of timing elements, in particular with how they relate to social media. But anyway, FEMA asked us to put a 2 or 3 page summary together after everything was over, going to give them a brief look. So again, this is kind of, some of this is review, and a couple of these didn't make our original list, but use of interactive maps. We had a lot of agencies using these maps to allow residents to determine if they needed to evacuate. The majority of the comments we saw were people criticizing the maps. So again, our recommendation was for them to go back and look at not only the data on the maps, but to look at things such as the technology they're using, their host networks, and of course the big variable that you have a hard time with, your audience. What type of demographic are you dealing with in terms of problem-solving skills on computers. I mean, there's some folks just don't know how to use the maps, and there may be a public education component that you need to look at. Agencies discouraging the use of social media. I apologize for the spelling error on the slide, but basically, again, the Coast Guard telling people, and several sheriff's departments retweeted and reposted. A couple of counties did as well. Don't use social media because we won't see it. But again, a lot of residents complaining the call centers were backed up, that they had no other way to get in touch with anybody. And then we're seeing literally hundreds of examples of people who saw the post on social media and either jumped in a boat and went and rescued somebody themselves, or made a phone call or did something of their own to try to help somebody out. So again, recommendation to these agencies that they don't take away a very, very, very important resource that people have started relying on heavily to help get things where they need to go. I mean, there was a typhoon out in the Philippines a few years ago where all the power and all the communication got cut off except for satellite. So people were using the internet. They were using their phones and things to actually find out where people needed help. And the emergency management officials were using these, social media, Twitter and Facebook, to disseminate supplies and resources and send Red Cross and help to these different regions in the Philippines. So it's been proven time and time again that social media is a huge operational tool during an emergency management event. So to tell a group of people don't use it was probably a little short-sighted. So our recommendation is to, again, use this as a case study for encouraging folks to staff up their social media monitoring and to allow for some type of process by which social media can still be used logistically to help people during this type of event. Understanding the social media platform, again, of all the counties and parishes we looked at, there were only a couple, really two counties that really gave a lot of thought to how they were using Twitter and Facebook. And as you may or may not know, when you post something to Facebook, you can actually connect it to Twitter so that it actually links over and it just reposts what you put on Facebook. Granted, up to 140 characters with a link to the rest. But we saw a lot of that. A lot of counties just linked it over, or they just retweeted the exact same thing they just put on Facebook. So, granted, you can do that, and your argument might be, well, like you said, different demographics, different audience, so we put out the same message. Why would we want to change it? Well, because you're dealing with different people. I mean, people who use Twitter, these tend to be folks that are more quick hit information. This is information that changes by the minute, and these aren't folks that are going to sit around and read long posts. So if you retweet your Facebook post, and I'm reading your 140 characters, and then there's a link and I have to read the rest, really, odds are very high I'm not going to click that link and read the rest of what you posted. So messages really, truly need to be catered to the platform. And as I said, there were only a couple of agencies that really, really did that. So again, we recommended using these as case study examples of how social media should be used more effectively to reach the target audience. And of course, we could use Brazoria and or Fort Bend as an example. Again, establishing an agency as an official source, correcting rumors and misinformation, and basically saying, if you don't get it from us, it's fake news, it's not real. They reasserted themselves as a source of official information. And there were several comments from residents who did take time out to express their gratitude that certain things have been clarified. Again, not comments like you're the greatest ever because they're in the middle of a storm and they're losing all their possessions, but a lot of comments on Facebook and Twitter that they felt better knowing what the true story was or what the reality of the situation was. I did want to bring one particular note, and I wish I could remember the county. I guess it's like the joke where you forget the punchline, but there's a county down around the border of Mexico and Texas that's very small apparently because their sheriff's office actually runs their social media page. But ironically, they had social media. They had a Facebook page. And I can only imagine, like I said, we didn't get into weeds on them, but it sounds like it's a very small sheriff's office. Probably the sheriff and maybe a handful of deputies. And once the storm hit, the sheriff was very, very busy going out, checking on residents, blocking off roads, doing what he needed to do in his county. But interestingly enough, he got his wife to get on Facebook. So it was really cute to see, hi, this is Hilda Hernandez, the sheriff's wife. And the sheriff wanted me to let you know that Road A and B is closed, so don't go down there. The sheriff wanted me to let you know that, these offices are going to be closed tomorrow, so don't try to go in. Sheriff wanted me to tell you that he was out at so-and-so ranch and all their livestock is okay. And then really the best part, and I thought this was, and I don't even know if they knew what they were doing, but she said the sheriff said that because we don't have enough people to staff the phones, if you're concerned about a relative or a friend, why don't you post their name right here on Facebook, and I'll forward the list to the sheriff, and he'll go out and check on them for you. So, again, at its rudimentary level, I mean, it was more cute than anything, but you kind of look at it and you go, wow, I mean, what an app. And this is really what it's all about, isn't it? It's a social media, it's engagement, the audience and the agency talking back and forth and going to some, extreme measures to make sure that information is being communicated through this platform. So, I mean, at the very basic level, absolutely a perfect example of how social media can be used during this type of event. So, and again, we brought that to their attention as well. There were some agencies that did a really, really good job, whether they intended to or not, and some that really could probably take some lessons away from this and work on it and do better. And again, I want to finish by saying, I didn't mention, I did say we monitored parishes, and I didn't give you any parish updates. The parishes really surprised me. I really thought, because of all that had happened with Katrina, and at that time when the storm was out in the Gulf the second time, getting ready to come back in, they really didn't know where it was going to hit. I would have thought every single parish would have just lit up with evacuation orders. But I was really surprised. It wasn't true. Out of the parishes we looked at, and I think there were maybe 13 or so parishes, 14 parishes, there were only 4 that were using social media at all. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but in Louisiana, for the most part, the cities don't do their own social media. They let the parish office do it. The parish has sort of all the power over the region. And there were only 4 that were using social media at all, and only 1 that even mentioned voluntary evacuation. So very surprising. And in the end, maybe they just knew something we didn't know, because I think there was only 1 or 2 parishes that really got rocked. All the rest got a lot of rain and seemed to do okay with it. But very surprising we just didn't see more out of Louisiana. But anyway, that's my presentation. Hopefully I didn't babble on too much and you found some value to what we did. I'm open for any other questions you might have about what we found, what we'll do next, or anything else that you might want to research.
Hey Jeff, I have a question from a member asking if your presentation will be shareable outside of our team. Can we share this, because this is wonderful information?
It will be. We have to wait just a little bit longer. Again, we did this for FEMA and they paid for it, so we have to make sure they get the product first. But absolutely, Holly has actually been pushing leadership over the last week to make this available. I think we were going to post at least a summary on the Past Fusion Center website that we did this, and then as soon as the presentation, the findings, if you will, as soon as they free us to put them out there, we will definitely make it available to everybody.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Any other questions?
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat here, Jeff. But if folks wanted to follow up with you or connect with you going forward, is there are you on social media? Is there a contact info for you?
Yeah, if you just want some broad information on the research we do, or any of the courses or capabilities the Past Fusion Center offers, it's right there on my screen there at pastfusion.anl.gov. But if you'd like to talk to me more specifically about what I did, I do have my own personal Facebook page. I'm Jeff Donaldson, obviously. You can respond to me there, or just shoot me an email. I'm at jdonaldson@anl.gov. So really easy, Oregon National Lab. And you can shoot me an email and I'll be back to you, very, very, very quick. So, and anything I can do personally, or anything the Past Fusion Center can do to provide a resource or be there for you guys, we are more than happy to. That's why we exist. We're passionate about this stuff. Again, it means a lot to us to be able to back up a lot of communication strategies with science. One of the biggest things, I've been in public affairs for a while, and you go to an emergency management situation, and the view has always tended to be, well, those are the public affairs guys over there. The public affairs are doing what public affairs does, and we're doing what we need to do. But there's a tremendous amount of integration between those two, and some agencies get it and some don't. But at the Past Fusion Center, our goal is to try to back up with science the real need to pay attention to your communication strategies and incorporate all facets of your response. So yeah, thank you so much for having me today. If there's ever anything I can do or Past Fusion can do for you, please let me know.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you.
Well, I think with that, you guys, we're going to go ahead and sign off here. We did run a little bit long, but this was great information. We appreciate Jeff taking the time to be with us today. The only thing I have in signing off here is just to remind everybody that our November and December meetings are going to be canceled because just it's too close to the holidays. We're going to have a bunch of people that are going to be gone and unable to attend. I believe that is already on the calendar that those meetings have been canceled, but I just wanted to remind everybody that our next training on October 20th will be the last one for the year. And then we will reconvene in 2018. So I don't know if there's anything else that Kyle had to sign us off here, but I think that's all I've got. And just to let you guys know, we did have a very successful recruiting season over the summer, and we brought on board about 9 new members over the last couple of months. So we are definitely growing, and we'll probably be running another campaign sometime next year in spring and summer.
Wow, that's fantastic, Jennifer. And again, welcome to all of our new members, and thanks for jumping in on all of our past activations and things. And we look forward to working with you in future. Again, just huge thanks. Shout out to Jeff for coming and presenting that. I'm sure we're going to see his content or some variation of that at several large national conferences and even international conferences going forward. Lots of great information there. And of course, with his contact info that he gave there at the end, you can always follow up with him, or Jennifer or I could put you in contact with Jeff as well. So just reminder, make sure that you sign in and out of the workbook to let us know, and so that we can honor your time commitment that you're giving us today for the training. Thanks everyone who's attending live. Thanks to all that are viewing this recording here in the end. And again, we'll see you October 20, same time, same place. For our next training, and that again will be the last one in 2017, so you won't want to miss it. And Jennifer, unless there's anything else, I think we're good to go.
Think that'll do it. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everyone, take care. Have a good weekend.